two things that you mentioned right at the outset that I think we should pin down for our listeners who might not have read Superintelligence are, one, what superintelligence is, since that's vital for the understanding of a deep utopia, and then also what this alignment problem is, because even though we will presuppose that it has been solved for a lot of this conversation, I think it's still important to understand what it is.
Yeah, well, so superintelligence is kind of an intellectual system that radically outperforms all humans in all cognitive fields, and so including, scientific creativity, wisdom, strategy, like the full range, really. And the alignment problem is the technical question of how, if you figured out how to make an AI that's generally capable of learning and planning and reasoning, how could you then steer it in some particular direction to make sure that even when it becomes much smarter than its creator, it still does what it's supposed to do, like what you intended for it to do, that it's kind of on our side, as opposed to becoming this antagonistic force that has different goals than we tried to give it, that then works at cross purposes with ours, broadly speaking. And there are different ways that different people have tried to make that precise, but that is more or less the gist of it. So yeah, this book kind of just assumes, or like postulates really, that all of that, the alignment problem is solved. Also that the governance problems are solved to whatever extent they can be solved, so that imagine we actually don't use this powerful technology to wage war against each other or to oppress each other, and that all these things that can be solved have been solved to whatever extent possible, in order then to actually get to the point where we can ask these questions about value. I have, of course, a lot of things to say in my other writings about these issues of getting from here to there. But there is a risk that if one starts to write about those, one never actually gets to consider what it's all for ultimately. And I think this holds in general with our existences as well. We are very busy putting one foot in front of the other, and maybe don't always take the time to reflect on where we are going, or and especially at the civilizational level. A lot of effort is being put into making progress, growing the economy, improving the technology, making things more efficient. But nobody really seems to have a clear notion of where does this lead us to in 50 years time, in 500 years time. But anyway, that's all kind of. Now, I don't know whether superintelligence is strictly speaking a premise, or it certainly is one technology, which if we had that, it would unlock a lot of other technological affordances, and you would more quickly approximate this condition of a solved world. But you could, in principle, imagine getting there just through a slower accumulation of human-driven automation. You could maybe imagine in the limit, just as you can create a little program that automates a specific task on your computer, or create a robot that makes one action in a car factory or something. If we just kept doing that for 100,000 years or 1 million years, maybe eventually we would have software and robots that could do all the tasks, and you could kind of at least get close to a similar situation without superintelligence.
Mm-hmm. You said that, so both the dystopian and the utopian sides of the coin were always on your mind from the beginning, but at the time you wrote Superintelligence, though it had been gestating for 7 or 8 years, you thought it was more a more pressing problem to deal with the alignment problem and the pitfalls of AI. But what I'm wondering is, so there was a practical element in writing Superintelligence. I don't want to get bogged down in how we get from here to superintelligence, because as you mentioned, that can take us very far afield, and we won't actually ever get to the utopian questions. But is there also a sort of practical dimension to writing about deep utopia because you think it is near at hand and we need to start thinking about it? Or is it more at this point just a philosophical exercise?
It's more the former for me, actually. I mean, I do think we are on a seemingly fast track towards the AI transition. And so it does give the whole set of questions greater practical urgency. And they might be relevant in all sorts of ways. Like there might, for example, be points at which we may need to make some trade-offs between taking on risks and undergoing this transition sooner versus delaying it in order to hopefully like make it safer, although that exposes us to other risks independent of AI. But and some of this might hinge on how urgent we think it is to improve upon or get out of the current human condition into something better. If you think that anything on the other side is like bad, right, then you might just want to preserve the status quo for as long as possible. If you think there is this like very wonderful utopia on the other side, then maybe you think, well, let's make sure we get there before we all just die from aging or something, and it would be worth taking some risk to make sure that we can reach that point. So these questions do, I think, flow back possibly to decisions that people have to make. But the main use case would be this: if people are at one point having to design the trajectory forward, and maybe they, with AI advice, are able to anticipate where it will lead. And like, one trajectory maybe leads to some kind of hedonism maximizing outcome. Another leads to some other complex situation. A third might lead to some kind of radically planetary-sized brains optimized for, processing scientific knowledge or something. And if some people need to make some judgments about the relative desirability of these, then I think it would be good if they had thought more about it than their sort of decisions were not merely reflecting on the latest thing they had happened to read on Twitter, or like how they happen to feel that day. Like if they wake up in a good mood, they think, it's the future is great and has a lot of opportunity. If they happen to wake up depressed, they kind of are a nihilist and think it would be better if the world just disappeared. And ideally, whatever decision is made should reflect a kind of broader set of considerations and values and perspectives than that. And so, contributing to that. And I guess one more thing to be said about that is that the prospect of the future going well, I think, is greater if people have this sense of there being great possibilities to realize not just one value, but many values. That if the future goes well, it unlocks this huge, would have this super advanced technology, plentiful resources, a lot of time, and there would be a kind of abundance. And I think that can help people approach things in a more generous way than if there is extreme scarcity and like one person's gain is another's loss and there is not enough for everybody, then it's very hard to be generous, right? It's easier to be generous if you have a lot. And so thinking ahead, if we could approach the future in this more cooperative and generous way, I think that also reduces the risk of various dystopian outcomes and improves the prospects. So those are some thoughts in the background.